Right, of course, I did talk about Polluted Wastelands 2, but I didn't talk about the new enemies that are in it specifically. So, firstly, we do have a new enemy called the Lurker. However, in the index, you'll notice that there is nothing under the L category. It is in O, because for some reason, despite being called the Lurker in the game, it's actually called the Overgrowth, because it's actually a returning enemy from the Lunar Overture event. In fact, I don't actually think it appears in the index at all, actually. Where it's not in O, so if we go back to L then, and oh, it is in L. Okay, never mind, I was blind then. However, this is the display name for the Lurker. The actual name, when you pick it up, is called the Overgrowth. And then we've got the Split here, which crawls on the body. It's the upper torso, and then the Splitter, which it splits into the upper and then the lower. You can't get the lower because the lower is actually connected to the original enemy. It's like second phase, much like the Awakened Fallen King, how you can't get the logbook for that. But since the upper part of the torso is actually its own enemy, you can get that. Again, it's actually not called the Split or the Splitter. It's actually called Hex Corpse and Hex Corpse Upper when you collect it. Obviously, no guesses why that's the case. Next, the Mutagenic Blight, which I still don't have the logbook for because I can't be asked to grind out Polluted Wastelands 2 all day. Whereas internally, this is actually called the Hex Weaver. And then one more thing is that they actually fixed the radioactive slime, or the super slime as it's now called, where it now spawned in the goo. So you now can get the goo logbook, whereas you couldn't previously, despite the fact that it's actually an evergreen enemy. Right, some other game mode changes that they made to Polluted Wastelands 2 is that they've changed the mutated to Waste Walker, as mentioned before, and its health has increased from 14 to 50 and now gives 50 cash on death. Now, the issue is with most Polluted Wastelands 2 enemies, if they've been renamed, they, for some reason, don't appear on the index, because I believe there's some issue with, like, legacy and modern namings, whatever. But if they didn't get renamed, something like the Super Toxic, one of them will have a correct index appearing for it, and the other won't. Similar to the other issues when it comes to Badlands 2 reworks, for example, and Pizza Party, where if the enemy was in the game previously, there's going to be an entry for the old one and an entry for the new one. Not the case if the enemy has been renamed, aka Waste Walker. Right, next they've changed the Waste Runner. So it originally was the mutated Speedy, now it's been renamed to the Waste Runner. Its health has increased from 18 to 60, and its speed has increased from 6.5 to 7.5, and now gives 60 cash on death. This is previously when it was damage on, it was cash on damage in Polluted Wastelands 2 for all enemies. Next, they got the Hazardous, and for some reason, this one isn't glitched for some reason. So originally, this was called the Polluted Hazmat. Its health has increased from 40 to 200. It used to have a shield health of 20, so actually its overall health used to be 60, but it's got that removed. It now gives 250 cash on death, and it's now got stun immunity and freeze immunity. So the electroshocker and freezing towers, such as the freezer, is less effective against this. In fact, freezer towers are basically useless against it because freeze immunity makes it completely immune, but it still can be stunned slightly by the electroshocker. Next, we got the super mutant. Developers are just changing everything to have like super in the name, you know? When everything's super, no one is. Anyways, its name has changed from the mutated boss, as it was previously called. It now gives 1,000 cash on death. Its health has increased from 500 to 850, and its speed has increased from 3 to 4.5. Meanwhile, the Breaker now has 75 health in Polluted Wastelands 2, and the Necromancer, also called the Summoner in the index, its health has increased from 800 to 2,500 in Polluted Wastelands 2, and its caching has increased from 198 to 1,155 every 33% health. Meanwhile, the Skeletons have been directly buffed in Polluted Wastelands 2, so that they now have 200 health compared to the 55 it used to be before. Here it says 10 because it appears in other game modes with 10 health. Next, the Toxic, its health has increased from 200 to 500. It now has shield health. It got its shield health removed. It used to be 100, so effectively its health has increased from 300 to 500. It now gives 750 cash on death, and Corpse, the Corpse attribute, has been added to this Toxic. Next, the Fleshling has changed, so that it now actually naturally appears in Polluted Wastelands 2, which is why I don't think it's glitched in the index, because it used to not appear naturally in Polluted Wastelands 2, but now it does. Its health has increased from 160 to 250, even though it's not mentioned here, and now gives 300 cash on death if it spawns in naturally. Meanwhile, the Amalgamation has been buffed so that its health has increased from 8,000 to 10,000. It now gives 625 cash every 25% health, and freeze immunity has been added to this boss. Oh yeah, I should mention, boss attribute has been applied to all enemies that spawn in debut for the Super Mutant, the Necromancer, the Amalgamation, the Mutagenic Blight, the Abomination, the Super Toxic, Templar, Necromancer King, and the Nuclear Guardian. And obviously the Nuclear Monster. Next, the Circuit 2, it's changed so that it now gives 875 cash every 25% health, and freeze immunity has been added, which is actually the only change that's been made to the circuit. Interestingly, its health hasn't been changed, nor has its speed changed, which I could have sworn it did, but I guess because of the freeze immunity, it now seems faster because you can't slow it down through the freezer or the sledger. Next, Breaker 4 now has 500 health in Polluted Wastelands 2, while Breaker 3 has 250. And the Rusher, its health has increased from 1000 to 1500. Its shield health has increased from 1400 to 1500. Its speed has increased from 10 to 12. This is using the outdated stats. Its defense has increased from 60% to 80%. It now gives 2500 cash every 50% health, which all of these are changes as seen in the modern variants, as you can see here, but obviously it doesn't have a preview image. Next, the Super Slime, or originally the Radioactive Slime, it now gives 20,000 cash every 50% health lost, and its health has increased from 8,000 to 15,000. Meanwhile, the goo that spawns from this, its health has decreased from 3,000 to 1,500, so actually it's been nerfed, but its speed has increased from 4 to 5. Interestingly, this is not fixed in sandbox mode because it still uses the legacy code. Next, the Super Toxic's been changed, so its health has increased from 12,000 to 40,000. Its speed has decreased from 3.5 to 3, but its defense has also decreased from 20% to 15%, gives 4,500 cash every 10% health loss. Its freeze immunity has been added to it, so you can't slow down through the sledger, but you can through the electric shocker. And corpse has now been added to this enemy. Now it has 50,000 health in Polluted Wastelands 2 and gives 150,000 cash on death in Polluted Wastelands 2, which seems like a typo, but I assume because it's so late in the game, the developers are preparing you to literally kill this nuclear monster through the cash you generate through this Templar. Next, the Cursed Skeleton. Its health has decreased from 2,500 to 1,250. It now has defense of 60%. Its speed has increased from 4 to 5.5. It is now a hidden enemy. It now has stun immunity and now has freeze immunity. It spawns in from the Necromancer King. Also, it does naturally appear, but it gives 5 cash on death, which is the default value given to enemies, which doesn't have a set cash on death value. Which leads us onto the Necromancer King, which is where most of the Cursed Skeletons spawn from. Its health has increased from 60,000 to 775,000. Its name actually should have changed from Necromancer Boss to Necromancer King, but again, the index is very weird, and it's still called Summoner 2 in the index. Anyways, its health has increased from 60,000 to 75,000, its speed has increased from 3.25 to 4, and now gives 40,000 cash every 20% health lost. The index for the Necromancer boss isn't it, by the way, it's just this is glitched for some reason, which I think is the first time there's been 3 entries for one enemy, I think. Because I don't see it anywhere else. Okay. Next, the Nuclear Guardian has changed, so its health has increased from 80,000 to 125,000. Its speed has increased from 2 to 2.4. Its defense has actually decreased from 50% to 20%. It now gives 125,000 cash every 50% health loss. Meanwhile, the Nuclear Monster. Did you know that the health of the Nuclear Monster has actually been halved, decreasing from 1.5 million to 750,000? However, the Nuclear Monster is also the first enemy, I think, to spawn in with bloated naturally. Its speed has actually increased from 1 to 1.25. It now gives 10,000 cash every 1% health damaged. The enemies has been updated summonally. I'll get that to that later. And bloated has been added. Now, fun fact, bloated was added to the Nuclear Monster so that it looked bigger. That's according to some testers, which is why its health has been halved, but the bloated has been applied so that it goes back to 1.5 million. But then also you get the scaling for trio and quad mode. All in all, that's just to say that the Nuclear Monster, very weird. And interestingly, its summons have been nerfed in the modern variants, whereby it doesn't actually spawn in any enemies for some reason. Not that the enemies are invisible, not that they don't, like, they do not appear at all, actually. So it seems like in that regard, it's been nerfed, but because that was the most annoying thing about the Nuclear Monster, that's actually quite a good nerf. However, this does not apply to the legacy version, which I think is seen elsewhere. Because yes, actually, fun fact, the nuclear variants of some of the enemies actually do appear in Oops All Slime. In fact, most of them do. And to my knowledge, they actually have not been updated in Oops All Slime, so they still have the original stats. So, for example, the Nuclear Monster doesn't spawn in with bloated in Oops All Slime, but the original enemies that used to spawn in through its ability still do apply. Now, as for changes to Polluted Wastelands 2 specifically, it now has a new reward system where, you know, it's just like the original Fallen mode, or it is like current Fallen mode. So there's a 0.4% chance of getting the Molten Monster from Polluted Wastelands 2, aka Nuclear Monster. Furthermore, the mutation modifier, which used to apply in Polluted Wastelands 2, it still does, but the health increase has decreased from 8% to 5%. Additionally, on Wave 24, it now plays Red Hex Temple, which is the ambience theme which you got for when you went into the event area during the Hexscape event, which is weird, but I guess it kind of suits the Nuclear Guardian. Furthermore, the music changes have changed so that between Wave 1 to 14 it is Wastewater, 15 to 23 it is They're Mutated, and obviously on the final wave it's still going nuclear. The starting cash has also increased from 500 to 1,150, or 1,250 if you are in the Paradoxum Games group. Its mode type has been changed from survival to special, and it now has its legacy modifier removed, because for some reason the legacy modifier was enabled for all of these maps before being slowly removed after they got reworked. Interestingly, the legacy modifier is actually applied to Golden mode, Legacy Fallen mode, and Legacy Multi mode if you spawn it into Sandbox mode. Oh, and I did a misnomer. The Oopsal Slime enemies, they actually have been updated. So, for example, the Toxics have Corpse and the Super Toxic has Corpse, and the Nuclear Monster has Bloated. So I think that means the Nuclear Monster now has 1.5 million health in Oopsal Slime, which is a massive issue because it was balanced around having it halved. But now it's been bloated so that it now has double that.